Della Hartwick owned the only ford on Cold Fork Creek, and both cattle kings rode straight through her yard as if her fence, her wash line, and she herself were nothing but smoke. Their riders came at a gallop one gray morning and tore her wet sheets down into the mud. She did not shout. She did not raise a hand. She only walked out, gathered the sheets, and repinned them, one wooden peg at a time. At the Bar V branding fire, in front of 40 of his own hands, Cyrus Vane said it cold and slow. "Send the widow home. This valley is decided by men who own it, not by women who beg its edges." And across the creek, Amos Rourke's men laughed. Two great outfits, one small woman standing between them. But folded inside her apron was a paper her dead husband filed in 1868, the one document that could end the whole war. Nobody knew it was there. Not yet. If you've ever been judged by your dress instead of your heart, this story is for you. So before we ride out, do this. Tap subscribe and stay with me to the end, because this one earns it. And leave me a comment telling me the town you're watching from tonight. I want to see just how far this story rides. Go on. I'll wait right here. Now, let me tell you how it began. It was the spring of 1871 in the Cold Fork Valley of the Wyoming Territory, a hard day's ride from the little rail stop they called Halloran Crossing. The snow was off the high ground, but not out of the creek, and the water ran fast and cold and mean. Della Hartwick had 80 proved acres, straddling the only reliable ford for 20 miles in any direction. She and her husband had broken that ground themselves. Eli had been 2 years in the ground now, up under the cottonwood where he'd wanted to lie. She ran 9 cows and a garden. That was all. 9 cows, a mule named Ruth, a patch of turned earth for beans and squash and onions, and a small house that Eli had raised board by board with his own 2 hands, and she owed the county $58 in back taxes. $58 she did not have. The notice said the land would go to sale in the fall if the debt wasn't cleared. She was scraping toward it a nickel and a dime at a time, selling eggs, selling butter, selling a heifer she could not afford to sell. She did not think of herself as anybody at all. That's the thing you have to understand about Della. She'd been raised to believe that a woman in a patched dress was the last person on God's earth that a powerful man would ever stop to hear. And in that valley, in that year, the world had done nothing but prove her right. She carried Eli's brass pocket compass in her apron. Always, it was a plain thing, dented on one edge where it had fallen off a wagon seat the first year they came west. The glass had a hairline crack across the north point. When she was afraid, and she was afraid more often than she let on, she'd take it out and open the little lid and watch the needles swing and settle. She called it asking it the way. Eli used to say a body never got truly lost if they'd only stop and ask the compass the way. She'd kept the habit after they buried him. It was the closest thing she had left to hearing his voice. Now, the 2 great outfits. To the north sat the Bar V and Cyrus Vane. His father had bled for that range in the early days, fought the Winters and the Sioux and the Market both, and Cyrus had inherited every acre and every grudge that came with it. He was 49 years old, hard through the jaw, and he had one rule he lived by above all others. Never look weak. His father had died looking weak, coughing and small in a back room, and Cyrus had sworn over the grave he'd never let the valley see him that way. So he ruled. He didn't ask. He rode. To the south, across the creek, sat the Circle R and Amos Rourke. Rourke was 52, and he swore up and down the water in Cold Fork had been promised to him back when the boundaries were first drawn. He'd lost his wife to the fever 6 winters back, and the grief in him had gone hard and bitter, the way a green branch goes to iron if you leave it long enough in the fire. He would rather burn the whole valley to the ground than be made to look the fool. That was the shape his sorrow had taken. 2 proud men, 2 big herds, 1 creek. And smack in the middle of it, straddling the only place a cow could safely cross, sat the small proved acres of a widow that neither of them thought about for more than a breath at a time. Vane's riders drove cattle through her yard because it was the shortest line to the north grass. Rourke's men watered on her bank because it was the softest slope down to the creek. Neither asked. Neither paid. When they trampled her garden rose or knocked a rail off her fence, they didn't so much as look back. She was a thing you rode past, like a stump or a stone, and every time Della straightened her back and set the rail up again. She'd learned that from Eli too. You keep your spine straight, he told her once, even when there's nobody watching. Especially when there's nobody watching. Because the day you let it bend for the little things is the day it bends for the big ones. Tomas helped her when he could. Tomas was 17, her late husband's orphan nephew, dark-eyed and quiet, and the only hand she had. He'd come to them at 12, after his own folks passed, and Eli had taught him to rope and ride and mend wire before the fever took Eli too. Now the boy was all she had of family, and she was all he had, and between the two of them they kept the little place alive. He carried messages sometimes, from her fence to the Bar V line, from the Circle R line back to her, because a boy could pass where a grown man with a gun could not. He was, though nobody thought of him that way, the pair of eyes that saw the whole thing coming. One afternoon early in that spring, Della went into the house to hunt up the tax receipt. She kept Eli's papers in a tin box under the bed, a dented old thing that had once held tea. She sat on the floor with it in her lap and sorted through by the window light. Deeds, the marriage lines. A letter from Eli's mother, long dead. The receipt for the plow. And down near the bottom, folded in quarters and gone soft at the creases, an old water paper from '68. She barely looked at it. She knew what it was, or thought she did, some filing Eli had made in the early days when he was forever riding to the land office over one thing or another. She set it aside on the floorboards and kept digging for the tax slip. That's how it goes, isn't it? The most important thing in the room, and you set it down without a second thought and reach right past it for a scrap of paper worth $58. She found the receipt, tucked the water paper back in the box, and thought no more about it. But the fence trampling had gotten worse that week, and Della had made up her mind to speak to somebody about it. So the next evening, she walked the 2 miles up to the Bar V, alone, on foot, because Ruth the mule had thrown a shoe and she wouldn't wait. They were branding that night. She could smell it before she saw it, the tallow and singed hair and wood smoke, and hear the bawling of the calves and the shouts of the men. 40 of them, near enough, ringed around the fire and the pens, and the iron-glowing cherry in the coals. Cyrus Vane stood at the center of it with his coat off and his sleeves rolled, and he looked like a king in his own hall. Della waited at the edge of the firelight until a lull came. Then she stepped in and made her ask, plain and quiet, the way she made every ask. "Mr. Vane, your riders have been driving stock across my yard and taking down my fence. I've mended the same rail 4 times this week. I'm asking you to hold your line to the North Road. That's all. Just the North Road." The fire popped. 40 men went quiet and turned to look at her, this small woman in a patched brown dress with mud dried on the hem. And Vane looked at her the way you'd look at a fly that had lit on the rim of your cup. He didn't even trouble himself to be angry. That was the worst of it. He said it easy, loud enough to carry, so his men would hear and remember. Send the widow home. This valley is decided by men who own it, not by women who beg its edges. Across the creek, close enough to hear, a knot of Rourke's Circle R riders had reined up to watch the show. And they laughed. They hooted and slapped their thighs, glad to see the Bar V man put the little woman in her place, because for one moment her smallness was the only thing the two outfits could agree on. And then somebody on the Bar V side said something back across the water about Circle R men minding their own bank, and a hand went to a rifle stock, and for a breath the whole thing near tipped over into gunplay. 40 men on one side, and a dozen on the other, and Della standing in the middle of it like a fence post in a flood. It didn't tip. Not that night. Vane barked once, and his men settled. Rourke's riders wheeled and rode back into the dark, still laughing. And Della? Della did not weep, and did not shout. She'd expected no better, if you want the truth of it, and getting no better did not break her. She looked Cyrus Vane full in the face for one long moment, so he'd know she'd heard every word and was not destroyed by it, and then she turned and walked back down the dark road toward home, with her spine as straight as a rifle barrel. But here is the small thing that nobody saw. Nobody but Tomas, who'd trailed her up the road at a distance, worried about her walking alone. After the fire burned down and the men bedded, Cyrus Vane took a lantern and rode alone to the edge of Della's land. He got down. He found the rail his riders had knocked loose that afternoon, and without a word to anyone, in the dark, the cattle baron of the whole North Valley set that widow's fence rail back up on its posts with his own hands. Then he mounted and rode home. He never spoke of it. He'd have denied it if you'd asked. But Tomas saw, from the willows, and Tomas told Della, and Della didn't know what on earth to make of it. A man who'd shame her before 40 men and mend her fence in the dark. She turned that over a long while and made no sense of it. So she set it aside, the way she'd set aside the water paper, and went on with her scraping and her 9 cows and her garden. The weather turned 2 days after. A cold rain came down out of the mountains, the kind of spring rain that soaks you to the bone and finds every gap in your coat. Della was walking home from the crossing with a sack of flour on her shoulder when it caught her, and she was a mile out and no shelter between here and there, so she just put her head down and walked. She heard the horse behind her before she saw it, a big bay, and Cyrus Vane on its back, wrapped in a good oilcloth coat that shed the rain like it was nothing. He drew up alongside her and matched her pace, and for a while he said nothing at all, and neither did she. Then he shrugged out of his coat and held it down to her. "Take it," he said. "You'll catch your death." Della kept walking. The rain ran off her nose and her chin. She looked up at him, and she said it gentle, but she said it clear. "I've weathered worse than your kindness, Mr. Vane. Keep your coat." And she walked on. And Cyrus Vane sat his horse in the rain with the coat in his hand and, for the first time in longer than he could remember, did not know what to do with himself. He'd offered a thing and been refused, not out of spite, not out of pride to match his own, but out of some quiet dignity he had no name for. It threw him clean off his balance. He watched her small brown figure grow smaller down the road, and then he put his coat back on and rode home the long way, thinking, that was the first degree the ice moved. He didn't know it. Neither did she. But it moved. Now the trouble that had only been simmering came to a boil. A week on, one of Rourke's circular fences was found cut, 3 strands of wire snipped clean, and a dozen head wandered off into the Bar V grass. And the same morning, a Bar V steer was found dead in the low meadow with a rifle ball through its lungs. Each outfit looked across the creek and saw the other's guilt plain as day. Rourke swore Vane's men had shot his steer and cut his wire to drive his cattle onto ground where they could be claimed. Vane swore Rourke had cut his own fence for the excuse and shot a Bar V beef out of pure meanness. The words that went back and forth across Cold Fork Creek that week would have curled the bark off a green tree. Della saw none of it. She'd been home both nights, and she told anyone who asked, which was nobody, because nobody asked the widow anything. But there was a thing she didn't see, and that you and I get to see, watching from up here. The night before that fence was cut, a stranger sat his horse at the crossing in the dark. A well-dressed man in a town coat and a clean hat, not a working rider at all. The kind of man who looked wrong on a horse the way a preacher looks wrong in a saloon. He watched the water a good while. Then he rode off north, careful, keeping to the soft ground where his tracks wouldn't hold. Nobody in the valley knew his name yet. His name was Silas Prentice. And he was smiling. But we're getting ahead. Back to the creek, because the creek is where it all came to a head. It happened on a bright, cold morning, maybe 10 days after the branding fire. Word had gone around, the way word does, that both outfits meant to water at the ford at the same hour, and neither would give way. It was never about the water alone. It was about who bent first. Cyrus Vane would sooner die than bend, and Amos Rourke would sooner burn than be bent, and so the two of them brought their men down to Cold Fork Creek to settle the thing with the only argument either of them truly respected. Della was in her yard when they came. She heard them first, the way you hear a storm, a low rumble that grew and grew, and then she saw the dust rise on both sides at once. Vane's riders came down the north bank and drew up in a line along the water, 40 guns. Rourke's men came down the south bank and drew up facing them, near 30 more. And there, in the crook of the creek, where the ford ran shallow, sat Della Hartwick's little house. Right in the crossfire. Eli had built it there for the water. Now the water had brought 2 armies to her doorstep, and if a single shot was fired across that ford, it would go straight through her walls. The 2 lines faced each other over the water. Somebody's horse stamped, somebody spat. And then, slow, up and down both banks, the rifles came up. Not fired, just leveled. 60-some men sighting on each other across a creek maybe 40 feet wide, and one small house square in the middle of the lane of fire, and inside that house a woman who had nowhere else on earth to go. Now I want you to picture what she did, because I think about it still. Della Hartwick took up her water bucket, the plain tin bucket she used every morning of her life, and she walked out her own front door, and down the little slope, and straight into the creek, into the ford, into the exact center of the water, between the 2 leveled lines, with the cold current pulling at her skirts up past her knees. And she stopped there. And she bent down, slow and deliberate, and she dipped her bucket, and she filled it, the way she had 1,000 mornings before. Then she straightened up and stood there with her bucket, in the middle of the ford, in the middle of the guns, and she did not move. You couldn't shoot across that creek now without shooting through her. Every man on both banks understood it in the same instant. If Vane's men fired, they'd cut her down before they touched a Circle R rider. If Rourke's men fired, the same. The little woman they'd both ridden past 100 times, the widow neither one of them would give the north road to, had put her own body in the one place their pride could not reach past. The whole valley held its breath. And one by one, up and down both banks, the rifle barrels came down. Not because either man had softened, not because peace had broken out, but because there was no way to keep shooting that did not begin with murdering a woman standing in a creek with a water bucket, and neither Cyrus Vane nor Amos Rourke, for all their hardness, was willing to be the man who did that in front of 60 witnesses. The guns lowered, the lines held their ground, furious, humiliated on both sides, each blaming the other and now both a little ashamed and hating her for it, because she'd shown them up. She'd done in one plain act what all their guns couldn't, and men like that don't thank you for making them look small. Rourke wheeled his horse and rode off swearing. Vane sat a long moment looking at her there in the water, and something crossed his face that even he couldn't have named, and then he turned his men and rode north. Della carried her bucket back up the slope and into her house and set it on the table, and only then did her hands begin to shake. But the valley had seen it, and from that day the war was in the open. No more pretending. Both outfits were on a war footing now, and everyone in Cold Fork knew that the next time the guns came up, there might not be a widow in the water to bring them back down. That should have been the end of Della's part in it. A small woman does a brave thing, and the big men go on with their war over her head. But it wasn't the end. It was barely the beginning. Because two things happened in the days after the ford, and together they changed everything. The first was word that came up from Halloran Crossing. The county recorder, the only man with the legal power to settle a land or water dispute in that district, made his circuit through the Cold Fork Valley just once each spring. And he was coming. 9 days out. Now here's the piece that mattered. The piece that a smiling man in a town coat understood better than anyone. If blood was spilled between the two outfits before the recorder came and ruled, then both disputed claims would be thrown into question, voided, and the whole valley would revert to open sale. A range war that killed men would not settle who owned the water. It would erase the question entirely and hand the whole valley to whoever had cash to buy it clean off the courthouse steps. Somebody wanted that war. Somebody was counting the 9 days same as everyone else, and hoping for gunsmoke before the recorder's wheels ever reached the ford. The second thing happened on Bar V ground, and it happened because a boy got thrown. He was a Circle R rider, 16 if he was a day, sent up along the disputed line to turn stock, and his green colt spooked at a grouse and pitched him into the rocks. He came down hard on his arm, and the bone snapped clean, and you could hear him screaming clear across the flat. The trouble was where he lay. He'd fallen on the Bar V side of the line, and by the time the Circle R men came pounding up to fetch their boy, Vane's riders had ridden out to hold their ground. And there the two knots of armed men sat, 20 feet apart, arguing over whose dirt the boy was bleeding on, while the boy screamed and screamed with the white bone pushing at the skin of his forearm. Della was near. She'd been mending fence down that way with Tomas, and she did not stop to ask whose ground it was, or whose boy it was, or whether a woman had any business crossing an armed line. She walked straight through the middle of both outfits, knelt down in the dirt beside a Circle R boy on Bar V ground, and went to work. She'd set bones before. Out here you learned, or you buried. She talked to him low and steady while she felt along the brake, the way you'd gentle a spooked horse. She had Tomas cut 2 straight lengths of willow for splints and tear her own apron into strips. And with the whole hard-eyed war standing over her, she took hold of that boy's wrist and his elbow, and she pulled the bone straight. And he shrieked once, and then it was in. And she bound the splints tight and made a sling of her torn apron and told him he'd mend fine if he kept it still 6 weeks. And Cyrus Vane sat his horse and watched a woman kneel in the dirt and do the one brave, useful, needful thing that not one of the 60 armed men around her had managed. She hadn't argued about the line. She'd just crossed it and fixed what was broken. He watched her, and the ice moved another degree, and this time I think he felt it move. That night, back in her own house, Della finally sat down to do the thing she'd been putting off. She had to find every last coin toward the $58, because the recorder coming through meant the taxman might come too, and she meant to have her money ready. So she pulled the tin tea box out again and sat on the floor and counted it out, and while she was in there she pulled loose that soft folded water paper from 68 to move it out of her way. And this time, tired and worried, and with nothing else to do while the coins sat counted, she smoothed it open on her knee and actually read it. And she went very still. It was a filing. A water right filing, made by Eli Hartwick and recorded at the Territorial Land Office in the year 1868, 3 full years before either Cyrus Vane's patent or Amos Rourke's had ever been drawn. It named the Hartwick Ford, her yard, the very ground she stood on, as the first and senior lawful claim on the whole of Cold Fork Creek. Every drop of water below her ford ran subject to that right. Eli had filed it in the early days, sharp as he always was about the land office, and then the years had gone by, and the great outfits had come in and thrown their weight around, and everyone, Eli included, had simply forgotten that a small homesteader's paper sat quietly at the bottom of a tea box, outranking 2 cattle kings. The water both those men were ready to kill each other over. The water they'd brought 60 guns down to the ford to fight for. By law, by the plain black ink of the territory's own records, it had never belonged wholly to either one of them. It answered to Della Hartwick's ford first, and always had. She sat on the floor a long time with the paper in her lap and the compass in her hand and the counted coins forgotten beside her. And then she did the thing that tells you everything about who she was. She told no one. Not Tomas. Not a soul. Because who on this earth would believe the widow at the edge of the valley, the woman they rode past like smoke, if she stood up and said she held the key to the whole war folded in her apron? They'd laugh the way Rourke's men laughed at the branding fire. She could hear the laughter already. So she folded the paper back up small, and she tucked it into her apron next to Eli's compass, and she kept her own counsel, and she waited, though she didn't yet know for what. A few days on, she did one more strange thing, and it surprised her more than anyone. She asked Cyrus Vane for an hour. She sent Thomas up with the message, plain as she said everything. Tell Mr. Vane the widow asks 1 honest hour of his time to ride the creek. Nothing more. And Vane, who'd have snorted at such a request a month before, said yes. He didn't quite know why he said yes, but he said it. So they rode the creek together, the cattle baron and the widow, along the whole length of Cold Fork from the high water down to the ford, and she showed him the true line of it, where it rose and where it ran and where every outfit drew, and he listened. They rode a careful distance apart. Their shoulders never once touched, and somewhere along that quiet water, unasked, Cyrus Vane began to talk. He told her a thing he'd never told a living soul. He told her about the range war that had come through this valley when he was a boy, and about his brother, older than him, who'd ridden out one gray morning to hold a line just like the one they were all holding now, and who'd come back over a saddle with a hole in him, dead at 19. He told her that was the day he decided he'd rather rule the whole valley than ever again stand small and helpless while the strong took what they wanted. That was the wound under all the hardness. That was why he'd rather be feared than fair. Fair had gotten his brother killed. He'd never said it aloud. Not once. In 40 years. He said it to a woman in a patched dress riding a mule along a creek, and when he was done, he looked almost afraid of what he'd let out. And Della didn't fill the silence with pity or with anything at all. She just rode beside him and let his brother's name sit in the quiet between them. Honored. And that was worth more than any comfort she could have offered. The ice moved again. It was more than ice now. Both of them felt it, and neither would have dared to name it. But the valley wouldn't wait for 2 proud hearts to thaw. The 9 days were nearly gone. And the 2 outfits, still burning from the humiliation at the ford, had made up their minds to settle the water once and for all before the recorder ever arrived, with lead this time, and no widow in the creek to stop them. Word went out. They'd meet at the ford at dawn. And this time, everyone knew the guns would not come back down. Della heard it from Thomas the night before, and she sat up long past dark with the compass open in her palm, watching the cracked needle swing and settle, asking it the way the same as Eli had taught her. She knew what she held. She knew what it could do. If only a single soul would listen. And she knew the price of standing up, the widow at the edge, and being laughed back down into the mud. But she thought about the little circle our boy's arm. And she thought about the sheets torn down into the mud and repinned 1 peg at a time. And she thought about Eli, 3 years in the ground, who'd filed that paper true and sharp in the early days and would want it to mean something now. And somewhere in the long dark of that night, a woman who'd spent her whole life believing she was nobody made up her mind to ride out in the morning and stand between 2 armies one more time. Dawn came gray and cold over Cold Fork. And they were already there when she came down the road on Ruth the mule. Both outfits. Vane's line on the north bank, Rourke's on the south, the whole width of the war drawn up along the water with the rifles already coming up. 60-some men and one small woman, and this time she carried no bucket. She rode Ruth down off the road and straight out into the open ground between the two leveled lines. Into the gap. Into the one place on earth no sane person would go. In her left hand, she held Eli's brass compass. And in her right, held up high where every man on both banks could see it, she held a folded paper gone soft at the creases, filed in the year 1868. Both lines wavered. Rifles hung half-raised. Cyrus Vane opened his mouth to shout her out of the way, and Amos Rourke's face went dark with fury at the widow's gall, and for one breath it could have gone any direction at all. And Della Hartwick, the woman they'd all ridden past like smoke, lifted her chin and made them listen. "Hold," she said. Just that. One word. It carried across the water because nothing else dared move. 60 rifles, and not one of them fired. Ruth the mule stood square in the current with her ears back, and Della sat straight on her, the paper high in one fist and the brass compass warm in the other. Cyrus Vane found his voice first. "Woman, you'll get yourself killed. Ride out of there." "I'll ride out when you've heard me," she said. Not a breath before. Amos Rourke spat into the creek. "We've got no time for the widow's sermon. Vane, give the word and let's be done." But Vane didn't give the word. And that was the thing nobody on either bank had ever seen. The Bar V held its fire because the man at its head was staring at the paper in her hand. "You've got 200 guns between you," Della said. Her voice didn't shake. She decided in the dark it wouldn't. 200 guns, and not one that can read. Somebody laughed. It died fast. "This is a water right filing," she went on. Recorded at the territorial office. "The year, gentlemen, was 1868. Before your patent, Mr. Vane, before yours, Mr. Rourke, 3 years before either of your names touched a single foot of this valley, my husband Eli filed the first and lawful claim to every drop that runs through this ford." The creek talked to itself in the quiet. "So you can bury your boys over water," she said. "Bury them in the mud here, both outfits, and when the recorder comes he'll find a battlefield and a dead man's claim standing over all of it. Or you can step down and let a nobody show you the truth you were both too proud to go looking for." Rourke's rifle came up an inch. "That's a lie. That's a widow's trick to save her fences. Then call me a liar to the recorder's face," she said. "He comes in 9 days. Wait 9 days, Mr. Rourke. 9 days won't cost you what a war will." And Cyrus Vane, who had shamed her in front of 40 men, who ruled the North Valley by fear and had not been told no in 20 years, Cyrus Vane took his hand off his rifle. "Lower them," he said. His men looked at him like he'd spoken in tongues. "Lower them," he said again, louder, and the North Bank's barrels came down like a field of wheat going over in the wind. Rourke stood alone then, with his line half raised, and no war to have. A man can't fight one side. He knew it. His face worked, and the pride in it fought the sense in it, and the sense won by a hair. 9 days, Rourke said. 9 days, widow, and if that paper's a fraud, I'll take the ford and your house with it. If it's a fraud, Della said, you can have both. You have my word. She turned Ruth in the current and rode up the south bank slow, past Rourke's men, who parted for her without being told, and not one of them met her eye. She'd made 2 armies listen. She rode home shaking so hard she had to grip the pommel with both hands, and she let no one see it. The next days were not peace. They were the held breath before peace or before ruin, and nobody knew which. She got them to a table. That was the miracle of it. She rode to the Bar V and she rode to the Circle R, and she laid it out the same to both. A shared schedule. Bar V water in the morning hours, Circle R in the afternoon, drawn lawfully off the senior right, and the Hartwick Ford the recorder of it all. Neither man would sit in the same room as the other, so she carried the terms between them like Tomas carried messages between fences, back and forth on a tired mule, and slowly, degree by degree, the thing took shape. It was on the fourth day that Silas Prentice started showing up at Vane's elbow. Della didn't like him. She couldn't have said why at first. He was well-dressed and soft-spoken, and he smiled the whole time. And that was exactly the trouble. Nobody smiled that much in Cold Fork Valley. He said he was a landman, up from Cheyenne, seeing to some surveys. He was always where Vane was, always leaning in, always a low word for the Baron's ear. On the fifth day, the well fouled. A Circle R well, the deep one by the South Line camp. Somebody had dropped a dead coyote and a sack of something worse down the shaft, and by morning the water came up green and stinking, and 3 head were sick from it. That same night, a Bar V line camp burned to the sills. Nobody saw who. Each outfit swore the other had done it, and the truce that Della had carried back and forth on a mule came apart in a single day of shouting. She rode to the Bar V to hold it together. Prentice was there, of course, on the porch, smiling. "You see how it is, Mr. Vane," Prentice was saying as she came up the steps. He didn't lower his voice for her. That was his mistake, though she didn't understand it yet. The widow plays both sides. She holds the only claim on the water. A burned-out valley, both outfits ruined. Why? That leaves her queen of the ford, doesn't it? The last one standing. The clever one everybody rode past. "That's a foul thing to say," Della said. Prentice turned his smile on her like a lamp. "Is it? You'll forgive a stranger his arithmetic, ma'am. I only add up what I see." Vane looked at her, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw the doubt cross his face, and it hurt worse than the rifles had. But he said, "The widow stood in the ford twice to keep my men alive. Hold your arithmetic, Prentice," and the doubt passed. That night she couldn't sleep for thinking on it. Who fouled a well and burned a camp the same night? Not Vane, not Rourke. Each of them had lost by it, and a truth turned over slow in her mind, the way Eli used to turn a horseshoe in the forge to find the flaw. Somebody profited from a war that ruined them both. Somebody who wasn't from the valley at all. She didn't have the whole of it yet. But she had the shape. On the 6th day she found Cyrus Vane at his own north fence at first light, sitting his horse and staring at nothing, and she saw what 40 of his men hadn't. He hadn't slept. Not that night, and not the 2 before it. It was in the gray under his eyes and the slack way he held the reins. A man holding a whole valley up with 2 hands and no rest. She didn't say anything about it. She'd learned that much from Eli, that a proud man can't be told he's tired. She rode back to her house. She built up the fire, and she boiled coffee, strong and black the way ranchmen drank it, and she carried a tin cup of it out to him, steaming in the cold, and she put it in his hand. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "No," she said. "You didn't." He drank it. He looked at her over the rim like he was seeing something he'd walked past 100 times and never once looked at. Something in the hard line of him bent, just a little, right there at the fence. "My brother," he said, out of nowhere. "You know about my brother. Tomas told me some. 19 years old. Killed in a range war just like this one, over water just like this, when I was a boy. I watched them carry him in. He turned the empty cup in his fingers. I swore I'd never be on the losing side of one again. I built the Bar V so no man could ever do to me what was done to him. And now here I am, one bad morning from burying my own boys in the same mud. You don't have to," she said. "That's the whole of what I've been trying to tell you." He handed the cup back. Their fingers touched on the tin. Neither pulled away fast. "Come to the house tonight," he said. "Bring the paper." Show me the waterline the way it truly runs. I want to see it with my own eyes before I stake 60 men on it." So that night they sat at Della's own table, the two of them, with a single lantern burning and the 1868 filing spread out flat between them and the creek drawn out in Eli's careful hand along the margin. Vane leaned over it. She leaned over it. Their heads came close in the yellow light. She traced the waterline with one finger, from the high spring down through the ford and out to the south flats, and she named each turn of it the way Eli had named it to her. And Cyrus Vane listened to a woman explain the ground he thought he owned, and he did not once interrupt. His hand came to rest on the map near the compass, near hers, a breath apart. "Della," he said. First time, not widow, not Mrs. Hartwick, her own name. In his mouth, quiet. She looked up and he was close, and the lantern was low, and 40 years of being nobody sat between what she wanted and what she believed she was allowed. She didn't move toward him. He didn't move toward her, but the ice that had stood between a baron and a woman in a patched dress was thinner in that lantern light than it had ever been, and they both felt it go. "It's late," she said finally. "It is," he agreed. Neither of them moved for a moment more. Then he rose and took his hat and stood in her doorway with the night behind him. "Thank you for the coffee this morning," he said. "Nobody's done a plain kindness for me in a long while." He rode off. She sat a long time with the lantern and the compass, and she asked it the way one more time, though she couldn't have said toward what. The truce was to be signed on the 8th day, both outfits at the ford witnessed, so no man could later claim he hadn't agreed. And the recorder due the 9th. It was so close. That was the trouble. It was so close that whoever wanted the war had run clean out of time, and so, on the 8th morning, he spent everything he had. They gathered at the fort under a hard white sky. Vane's line on the north, Rourke's on the south, but slung rifles this time, the guns down, the men uneasy but come to sign. Della stood in the middle on the gravel bar with the paper. It was working. God help her, it was actually working. Then a shot cracked. One shot, from nowhere and everywhere, echoing off both banks. A Bar V hand yelled and grabbed his arm, grazed, blood between his fingers, not dead, but bleeding. And in half a heartbeat every slung rifle in the valley came up, north bank and south, and the 8th day tipped straight toward the grave. Who fired? Vane roared. Who fired that shot? "Your man's shot," Rourke bellowed back. "Your trick, Vane. One of yours winged to blame us," and into that boiling half-second, smooth and smiling, stepped Silas Prentice with a paper of his own. Mr. Vane, he held it up high, the very way Della had held hers. "Before you sign anything off the widow's claim, you'd best see what she signed a week ago." He carried it to Vane and put it in his hand. Della's stomach dropped, because she knew, whatever it was a lie, and she knew how a lie looks when it's dressed up on good paper. "A bill of sale," Prentice announced, loud for both banks. "Della Hartwick to the Cheyenne and Northern Land Syndicate. She sells the ford, the whole senior water right, to my company. Signed and dated. War or peace, gentlemen, she was always going to sell you both out. She only needed the valley frightened enough to make the claim worth buying." "That's forged," Della said. "I never signed a thing. I've never seen that paper in my life." But the shot was still ringing in every man's ears, and the blood was still bright on the Bar V hand's sleeve, and fear makes a man believe the worst fastest. Della watched it happen on Cyrus Vane's face. The doubt came back. And this time the grief and the old dead brother and the sleepless nights all came up behind it, and the doubt turned to something colder. "Is that your hand?" Vane asked her. His voice had gone flat. "That signature. Is that your hand, Della? It's made to look like it. It isn't mine." "It's close enough," he said, and he looked at the forgery, and he looked at her, and something shut in his face like a door. "I sent you home once," he said, low and terrible, saying the very words he'd said at the branding fire, in front of 40 men, to hurt her the most. "I should have made it stick. This valley's decided by men who own it, not by women who beg its edges and sell them out." The whole ford went silent. 40 Bar V men and 60 Circle R, and not a sound but the water. Della Hartwick stood very still. She did not cry. She did not argue. She'd been called nobody her whole life, and she found she still knew how to carry it. She walked up to Cyrus Vane, and she took Eli's brass compass out of her apron, the dented one with the hairline crack across the north point, the one she'd carried her whole grief in. And she put it in his hand and closed his fingers over it. "You'll want to find your own way then," she said, "since you won't take mine." And she turned Ruth and rode up out of the ford with her back straight as a fence post, past both armies, and not one man on either bank could look at her as she passed. She left the paper. She left the compass. She left the whole war behind her in the mud, and she rode home a nobody, exactly the way she'd started. But she'd been wrong about one thing. She thought she was riding out alone. She wasn't. Tomas had seen it all from the south bank, standing at Rourke's stirrup where the boy carried messages. And Tomas, 17 and orphaned and quiet, had watched Silas Prentice the whole time instead of watching the paper. He'd seen the man's eyes when the shot cracked. Prentice hadn't flinched, not a hair. Every other soul in that valley had jumped at the gunshot except the one man who'd known it was coming. Tomas grabbed Amos Rourke's sleeve. "Mr. Rourke, that shot didn't come from either bank. I was looking. It came from the willows, up above the ford. From behind us both." Rourke, who'd buried a wife and let the grief turn him to flint, looked down at the boy. "You're sure? I'll show you the place." And Amos Rourke, of all people, was the one who went. Maybe because Della had once named his dead wife's people to his face and spoken to his grief when no one else would. Maybe because a man who'd lost that much can smell when he's being played. He took Tomas and two of his steadiest hands, and they rode up into the willows above the crossing while both outfits were still shouting at the ford. They found the shell casing first, then the flattened grass where a man had lain to shoot. Then, following the sign down the back slope, they found a saddlebag cached under a deadfall, and in it a coil of the same cut wire that had been found on the Circle R fence, and an empty poison sack that stank of the fouled well, and a folded letter on Cheyenne and Northern Land Syndicate stationery, dated 3 weeks back, laying the whole thing out in a clerk's tidy hand. Foment the war. Void both claims by bloodshed before the recorder's circuit. Buy the valley at forced sale. Bonus to the agent on completion, signed by the company and countersigned by their man in the field. Silas Prentice. Rourke read it twice. Then he folded it up and put it in his coat, and he looked at Tomas with an expression the boy had never seen on him. "Get on your mule, son," Rourke said. "We're going to the Bar V. And I'm going to sit at Cyrus Vane's own table and make that proud fool read the truth." It was near dusk when they laid it out on Vane's table. The cut wire. The empty poison sack. The forged bill of sale beside the real syndicate letter, so the same clerk's hand showed plain in both, and beside all of it, the genuine 1868 filing that Della had left in the ford, that Vane had carried home and couldn't bring himself to burn. Cyrus Vane read the syndicate letter standing up. Then he sat down, slow, like his legs had stopped agreeing to hold him. He read it again. He put the forged sale next to the real letter and saw the same pen, the same tidy loops, the forger's own hand giving him away. And the pride went out of Cyrus Vane's face while 3 men watched, and what was left underneath it was an old grief and a worse shame. "She never lied to me," he said. "It wasn't a question. Not once. From the first day. The one soul in this valley who never once lied to me, and I threw her out of that ford with my own words. In front of my men. You did, Rourke said. He didn't soften it. She named my Sarah's people to me. Did you know that? Sarah's mother was a Colby, out of the Platte country. This widow knew it and said it kind, when every other soul had let me rot in it. She's the only honest thing that's come through Cold Fork in 6 winters. He tapped the syndicate letter, and this smiling snake near got us to kill each other over it. Where's Prentice now? A Bar V hand spoke from the door. Rode for Halloran Crossing, an hour back. Said he'd be seeing to the recorder. Vane came up out of the chair. Seeing to the recorder. The gray went out of his face, and something harder came into it. The recorder makes his 1 circuit tomorrow. If Prentice turns him back at the crossing, sends him home saying the valley's too hot to ride into, then there's no seal, no filing recorded, and the sale stands and the claims void just the same. He doesn't need the war anymore. He just needs the recorder never to arrive. He was already reaching for his hat. Mount up, he said. Every man. Bar V and Circle R both. His foreman balked. Ride with the Circle R? Ride with the Circle R, Vane said, or ride for another outfit. We've been fighting the wrong men for a month. Tonight we fight the right one. And so the thing happened that Cold Fork Valley had never once seen. The Bar V and the Circle R came down out of their 2 country at dusk and made 1 line on the road, 60-some men who'd have shot each other that morning, riding stirrup to stirrup toward Halloran Crossing with a common purpose for the first time in the valley's history. Amos Rourke rode at the front on the left, Cyrus Vane on the right, and between them, on a tired mule, a 17-year-old boy who'd watched the right thing while everyone else watched the lie. They stopped at the Hartwick house on the way. Della came out on the step with a lamp, and she saw 2 armies in her yard, and she thought for 1 cold second they'd come to take the fort after all. Then she saw who rode at the front, and she saw they'd come together, and she couldn't make sense of it. Cyrus Vane got down off his horse. He came to the bottom of her step, and he took his hat off. And in front of 60 men he held up Eli's brass compass in the lamplight. I owe you this back, he said. And I owe you more than I know how to say in front of this many ears. Prentice forged that sale. Rourke and your boy Tomas ran the whole thing to ground, the cut wire, the well, the first shot, all of it his, all of it for a syndicate that wanted us to bury each other so they could buy the graves cheap. You never lied to me. I called you a liar in that ford and I quoted my own worst words at you to do it, and I was the fool, not you. I'd get down on my knees in this mud right now. Except, we're out of time. He's riding to turn the recorder back at the crossing. If we don't reach him tonight, your paper's worth nothing and the valley's lost. Della looked at the compass in his hand. She looked at the 2 outfits mingled in her yard. She looked at Tomas, sitting proud and scared on his mule, and at Amos Rourke, who gave her a slow nod. Then don't kneel in the mud, she said. Ride, she came down the steps and took the compass and put it back in her apron where it belonged. And I'm riding with you. It's my husband's paper. I'll see it sealed myself. They reached the crossing at Halloran under a low moon. And they weren't a minute early. The county recorder's buggy stood in the road with the horse already turned around, and Silas Prentice stood at its wheel with 2 hired men and that same soft smile, telling the recorder the valley was in open war and no place for a county man, that he'd best come back in the fall when it had cooled, that Prentice himself would see the filings safe till then. 60 riders came out of the dark and stopped that buggy from turning. Prentice's smile held even then. He was good at his work. You had to give him that. Mr. Vane, Mr. Rourke. Together. How touching. You'll want to let this county man go on home. The valley's no place for. "The valley's no place for you," Rourke said, and he rode up and dropped the syndicate's own letter into the recorder's lap. "Read that, county man. Take your time. It's the confession of the fellow at your wheel, in his employer's own hand, laying out how he cut fence and poisoned a well and fired on 2 outfits to void every claim in this valley for a Cheyenne land ring. There's your open war. There's the man who made it." The recorder was an old dry fellow with spectacles, and he read the letter by lantern light, and then he read the forged bill of sale that Vane handed him, and then he looked up at Silas Prentice over the top of his spectacles with the particular disgust of a man who has spent 40 years watching people try to lie to the county. "This is your hand, sir," the recorder said. "The forgery and the letter both. Same pen. Same loops on the capitals. I've disallowed 1,000 frauds, and I know a man's hand when I see it twice." He folded them away into his case. "You'll ride back to the crossing under these men's charge and answer to the territory for it. Fence cutting, poisoning stock water, discharging a firearm into a gathering, and forgery of a land instrument. That last one alone will keep you a good long while." The smile finally came off Silas Prentice's face. He looked at the 60 men, and the odds, and the old recorder who couldn't be bought, and last of all he looked at Della Hartwick in her patched dress, the one honest person he'd never once counted as a threat. "You were supposed to be nobody," he said to her, almost wondering. "I know," she said. "Everybody keeps telling me." They took his gun and his horse and put a Circle R man on either side of him, and that was the end of Silas Prentice in Cold Fork Valley. The recorder held his circuit right there in the road, because he said he was up, and there was moonlight, and he'd be damned if he'd ride back in twice. He set his case on the tailgate of the buggy for a table. And Della Hartwick brought out the 1868 filing, gone soft at the creases, filed true and sharp by a dead man in the early days, and laid it under the lantern. The recorder read it slow. "Eli Hartwick," he said. "Filed at the Territorial Office, 1868. Senior water right, the whole of Cold Fork Creek at the ford." He looked up. "This is genuine, ma'am. This predates every patent in this valley by 3 full years. In law, the water was never wholly either of these gentlemen's to fight over. It was your husband's first, and now it's yours." "I don't want to own the water," Della said. "I never did. I want it shared, lawful, so no one has to die over it again. Morning hours to the Bar V. Afternoon to the Circle R. Drawn off my right, recorded by you, and the ford kept neutral for both." The recorder wrote it out in his tidy county hand, a shared water schedule off the senior Hartwick right, binding on both outfits, sealed by the county. He set the seal to it, red wax in the moonlight. "Sign," he said. Cyrus Vane signed first. Then he held the pen out across the tailgate to Amos Rourke, the man he'd been ready to kill that morning, and Rourke took it, and the 2 cattle kings signed the same paper without a shot fired, the truce that all their guns together could never have made. Rourke was the last to sign. He stood over the paper a moment with the pen, and he said, "Quiet. Only Eli's name. Eli Hartwick." And then he filed true, and he signed, and it was done. It was Cyrus Vane, though, who did the thing that the 40 men who'd laughed at the branding fire would tell their grandchildren about. He came around the tailgate to where Della stood in the wet gravel of the crossing, near the water, near the very place she'd stood between the guns. And he took his hat off again. And this time he did get down, one knee in the cold gravel, in front of both outfits and the county recorder and God's own moon. "I called you a woman who begs the valley's edges," he said, "in front of these men. So I'll unsay it in front of these men. Della Hartwick, I'm not asking you to sign your water away to anybody. I'm asking you to hold the senior right for the whole valley, and to keep the record of it, and to be the center of the thing you saved. And I'm asking you to hold it beside me, if a proud fool has got any claim left on your patience." The 40 men who jeered were silent now. Every one of them. Della looked down at Cyrus Vane on his knee in the gravel, the Baron who'd ridden through her yard like she was smoke, and she felt 40 years of being nobody sitting on her tongue. And she found she didn't want to say yes yet, not because she didn't want him, because she'd learned the worth of her own word, and she'd have it honored before she was held. "Get up off your knee," she said. "You'll ruin your good trousers." A ripple of low laughter went through the men, and it broke something loose in the cold. "I've got one answer, and it's not yes. Not tonight." She waited until he'd risen, until his eyes came level with hers. "Read the water schedule aloud." "To your men. All of them. The one you just signed. Read it so every hand on both outfits hears what a nobody in a patched dress brokered when 60 guns couldn't. Read it first. Then ask me again. In the morning, at the ford, in the light, and I'll have an answer worth the having. Worth before love." He understood it. She saw him understand it. Cyrus Vane took the sealed schedule off the tailgate, and he read it out loud in the moonlit road to 60-some men of 2 outfits, every clause, the Hartwick senior right, the shared hours, the neutral ford, and when he finished, Amos Rourke took his hat off too, and one by one, down both lines, the men bared their heads to the widow they'd ridden past like smoke. There was the small matter of $58. Vane offered it, of course, the morning after at the ford in the light, before he asked her again. Offered to clear her back taxes so the county couldn't ever come for the 80 proved acres. "No," Della said. "I'll pay my own. 9 cows in a garden and a summer's egg money. I'll have it by the fall sale, and it'll be mine that paid it." She smiled, the first easy smile in a long while. "I'll take you, Cyrus Vane. But I'll pay my own tax." And she did. $58, counted out of a tin box in her own worn hands, laid on the county desk that fall by nobody but herself. A year on, Cold Fork ran shared and green. You could ride down to the ford of a summer evening and see it, Bar V cattle drinking the morning hours, Circle R the afternoon. The brands watering the same water off the same lawful schedule, and not a rifle in sight on either bank. Amos Rourke grew easier as the seasons turned. The grief didn't leave him. Grief like that doesn't. But it stopped curdling. And he'd tip his hat to Della every time he passed her ford, and once a season he'd say her dead husband's name, and he filed true. Like a small prayer. Silas Prentice answered to the territory for the forgery and the fence and the fouled well and the shot fired into a gathering, and the Cheyenne and Northern Land Syndicate never did buy Cold Fork Valley cheap or dear. Della sent them one line, by the recorder's own post when it was all sealed and done. It said only this: the syndicate underestimated a woman in a patched dress. So did better men. She keeps the Valley Water Office now, in a little room off the house at the ford, where both outfits come to read the schedule and settle their turns. On the wall, in one frame, hang 2 things. Eli's brass pocket compass, dented, the hairline crack still across the north point that once carried a widow's private grief, and beside it the 1868 filing, gone soft at the creases, that once lay forgotten in a tin box under a bed. A grief token and a dead man's careful hand, framed together as the guiding record of a whole valley. She'll tell you, if you ask, that she still takes the compass down sometimes and asks it the way, the same as Eli taught her, though these days she mostly already knows it. Cyrus Vane learned to sit at that little office table and be quiet while his wife explained the ground he'd once thought he owned. And now and again, when he gets too sure of himself over some matter of cattle or men, she has a way of reminding him. She'll look up from the record book, mild as milk, and say, "This valley's decided by the folks who own it, Cyrus, not by proud men who beg its edges." And he takes it, every time, hat in hand, because a wise man learns to hear his own worst words said back to him gentle, by the one who was right. The pride that all the guns and money in Cold Fork couldn't hold together was held, in the end, by the one soul everyone rode past. So the next time the valley of your own life sends somebody by in a patched dress, somebody you'd overlook, you might just look twice. You never do know who's holding the paper that saves the whole place. If you've ridden this far with Della, do one thing for me. Comment the town you're watching from. I'd dearly love to see how far this story has carried.